Blessings upon your journey as we seek wisdom, as we act wisely in our discipline, and as God continues to help us grow in that wisdom. That's why we hunker down in His Word each and every day. Today is quite an interesting proverb. Once again, a father addressing to his son, and he is real with his son. He is authentic with his son about the dangers of giving of himself to others, to giving of himself to, frankly, other women, other sin, just not having, frankly, the blessing and the gift that God has given to him personally, the son, but being able to put that wherever he may. It does talk about the sexual relations that he could have with an adulteress or, frankly, a faithful wife. And what would it be that God blesses? Obviously, we get to see that it is the blessing of marriage that God intends, that God upholds, that God institutes. And Luther put it this way. Let me read you a little section of him speaking of the Proverbs, but speaking of marriage as well. He says, significantly, He, God, established the marriage, as the first of all institutions. And He created man and woman differently, as is evident, not for lewdness, but to be true to each other. Be fruitful, beget children, and support and bring them up to the glory of God. God has therefore most richly blessed this estate above all others. For it is of the highest importance to Him that persons be brought up to serve the world, promote knowledge of God, godly living, and all virtues, and fight against wickedness and the devil. Marriage is instituted by God to showcase who God is. Because as we get to see in marriage, and as Paul picks up in Ephesians and in 1 Corinthians, we get to see that marriage isn't just between a man and a woman. Marriage is definitely a covenant between how God viewed the love for His people, and that Christ is that groom and the people are that bride. And it speaks biblically over that over and over again, that God sees that as so important, that it is of the highest importance, because it does frankly speak to who their God is and what their covenant with one another is and what their covenant with God is. And so that's why it picks up in chapter 5 of Proverbs, that it's a warning from father to son to not give himself to others in amongst his marriage, to not look upon the adulterous woman and being able to see that as attractive, but more than anything, to see the wife as attractive, and being able to just enjoy the gifts and the blessings that God has established in that marriage. And it's a struggle day after day, because the evil one, especially in our world today, with all the media and with everything that it thrusts, frankly, sexual pleasure and thrusts sexual beings in so many different ways rather than what God intended. It is always, these words really heed today, being able to say, what are the pressures? What are we facing? And what is God's design, or what can we ask God to help us grow in, or frankly be disciplined in our faithfulness to our wives, in our faithfulness to our husbands, in our faithfulness to relationships. And so that's what Proverbs 5 puts forth. I'm going to read it to you. It's all of Proverbs 5 is this warning, is this address from father to son, and it goes back and forth. So I might interrupt while we read, but let's read chapter 5 of the Proverbs, a warning against adultery. My son, pay attention to my wisdom. Listen well to my words of insight, that you may maintain discretion and your lips may preserve knowledge. Remember, as we just talked about in this last video in chapter 4, that what comes from the heart is what comes through the lips. And being able to say, preserve the knowledge that is on your lips. Now, the adulterous woman is going to be able to seduce with lips or with her palate, of being able to, whether it be kissing, whether it be sexual intimacy, all those aspects is coming in this chapter. But preserve, guard your lips. Do not let them be persuaded in any other direction, but hopefully have the knowledge and fear of the Lord coming from the heart. That is the wellspring of life. Verse 3, for the lips of an adulteress drip honey, and her speech is smoother than oil. She's seductive. Verse 4, but in the end, she is bitter as gall, sharp as a double-edged sword. Her feet go down to death. Her steps lead straight to the grave. She gives no thought to the way of life. Her paths are crooked, but she knows it not. So once back to the imagery of the path, that the adulteress might look good right at the beginning, may be attractive, but her ways are not attractive. Her ways lead to death of relationships. Her ways lead to death in eternity. Her ways lead to death in general, and that way of her steps lead straight to the grave. That's Sheol. That is to the place that is forbidden by God. And that's why it might seem good at first, that attraction and that sexual persuasion, but it leads to death. It leads to a picture that we don't want to walk in. And so that's what the Father is trying to give the picture of the Son. I know the ending result, son, so don't walk in this path of adultery. He says, now then, my sons, listen to me. Do not turn aside from what I say. Keep to a path far from her. Do not go near the door of her house, lest you give your best strength to others and your years to the one who is cruel. Lest strangers feast on your wealth and your toil enrich another man's house. At the end of your life you will groan when your flesh and body are spent. You will say, how I hated discipline, how my heart spurned correction. I would not obey my teachers or listen to my instructors. I have come to the brink of utter ruin in the midst of the whole assembly. It's not just that adultery puts you into a place that you're going to hurt others, that you're going to hurt a relationship, that you're going to bring death to a relationship. It is adultery and putting yourself in the way of sin, that it has a huge effect on you personally as well. You are going to give yourself, not to just this other woman, not to just this other sin. You're going to give yourself into another way that welcomes sin, that welcomes death, that welcomes the evil one as the Lord and Master of your life. And so be careful, he says. Verse 15, drink water from your own cistern, running water from your own well. Should your springs overflow in the streets, your streams of water in the public squares? Let them be yours alone. Never be shared with strangers. So this is giving us a picture of marriage. Just drink from your own cistern. Drink from the great water, the pleasure, and the incredible nourishment of your own marriage. Don't put it onto the public streets. Verse 17, let them be yours alone. Never be shared with strangers. May your fountain be blessed, and may you rejoice in the wife of your youth. All right, being able to say a picture of water is seen here in the marriage, and it was water was a rarity in Palestine at that time. To have your own water supply was such a blessing, and that's what he's saying to here in this marriage, and being able to say what you receive from this marriage. Verse 19: a loving doe, a graceful deer. They're just incredible animals at that time. May her breast satisfy you always. May you ever be captivated by her love. Why be captivated, my son, by an adulteress? Why embrace the bosom of another man's wife? For a man's ways are in full view of the Lord, and he examines all his paths. The evil deeds of a wicked man ensnare him. The cords of his sin hold him fast. He will die for lack of discipline, led astray by his own great folly. Let us heed the words of the Lord again, that the Lord's ways are the right way. That when our nature comes forward and our sinful nature and desires certain things that aren't of God, let us heed the words of wisdom. Let us act in our discipline in that wisdom to understand that even though it's the ups and downs of marriage, even though it's the ups and downs of relationships, that God has intended it to be a blessing. So continue to drink from our own ways, our own cistern, our own waters and fountains in our marriages, rather than giving it to the other in any kind of way we think about, whether it be lust, whether it be lies, whether it be words, whether it be actions, whether it be flirting, whether it be all those different aspects. Let us keep those in our own marriages, because God has intended that way and he will bless that. And so as we walk in our relationships, let us think about how Christ acted in his relationship with us, loved us unconditionally, continued to lift us up and encourage us. He blessed us by calling us his own and being able to always be with us. So let us be in that picture and on that path this day, not giving ourselves to sin, but rather walking in the wisdom and the knowledge of the salvation and the gospel of Jesus Christ. Have a blessed day.